My name is Alana Grelyak, and today we're going to talk about what each symbol in sheet music means. There are a lot of symbols in sheet music, so it's difficult to be able to tell you what every single one means, but there are several basic ones that you're going to be seeing all the time whenever you pick up a piece of music, and those are the ones that we're going to go over because these are the ones you're going to see the most. When you read sheet music, it's pretty much like learning a completely new language. It has its own sounds, its own alphabet, and the best way to learn how to read sheet music is when you memorize these symbols and you can see them and read them just as quickly as you would the alphabet. So when you put them all together, it's going to sound like something. You want to be very detailed when you're reading sheet music as well because every little symbol counts. For instance, if there's a dot under a note, that's going to mean something different than a dot that's next to a note. So you really do have to pay attention if you want it to sound like what the composer intended. So one of the first things we're going to talk about is the staff. Just about every instrument uses the staff, except for percussion. If you want any kind of pitched instrument though, like a piano or a violin, you're always going to have a staff there because that's how we know what the pitches are. Pitches are when the notes sound different. For instance, a C is a different pitch than a G. So the first thing is the staff. The staff is comprised of 5 lines and 4 spaces. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We count from the bottom up, and then the 4 spaces that are in between them. If you're just using one staff, some instruments just use one staff, like the violin, the cello. The other instruments that use more than one staff, though, would be the piano, the accordion, anything with a keyboard pretty much. A harpsichord can use 2 or more, and those are joined by a brace on the side, and they put 2 together, and we read them at the same time. The staff, though, as you can see, a piano has 88 keys. The staff only has, as we talked about, 5 lines and 4 spaces. So how do we get 88 keys onto the staff? We need to have something called clefs. Clefs come right at the beginning of the music. The 2 most common ones that you're going to see are the treble clef and the bass clef. The treble clef is the one that tells us what the top half of the keyboard is going to be playing. It can also be used for high instruments like the violin, the flute, the voice. If you're singing a soprano line, a higher voice is going to use a treble clef. The treble clef always wraps around line 2. So remember, when we're counting from the staff, we count from the bottom up. So we're going to go 1, 2. That little curl in the treble clef wraps around line 2, and that always tells you where the G above middle C is. In this case, in the piano, you find middle C, and it's this note. We then have the bass clef. The bass clef tells us where everything on the lower half of the piano is going to be, or other lower sounding instruments are going to use that, like a tenor singing, a bass voice would use that, also a bass guitar, a cello, etc. So that one is going to sit on line 4. We're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's going to wrap around line 4. The 2 dots are going to go over the line so that the lines in between them kind of looks like a division symbol. And that is going to tell us always where the F below middle C is. So on the piano, we're going to find middle C. We're going to go down, and it's going to be the F below middle C. It's always going to be that F. It's never going to be any of the other Fs. When you have the 2 clefs together, the piano, you're going to be reading 2 at the same time. Now, the reason we have these clefs, you can see, is that now you have 5 lines and 4 spaces, but we have 2 different ways of reading them. So for instance, if you have a treble clef, line 1 of the staff is going to be an E. But if you have a bass clef, that same line 1 of the 5-line staff is going to be the G way down here. So it makes a big difference, and you want to get really good at being able to read which line and which space means which pitch on your choice, your instrument of choice. So the next thing that we're going to talk about then would be time signature. This comes directly after any of the clefs. The most common one is 4/4. So let's use that as an example. You have a number on the top and a number on the bottom. So if we're in 4/4, the number on the top tells you how many beats are in each measure, and the number on the bottom tells you which note gets the beat. So in 4/4, we have 4 beats in each measure, and then the one on the bottom tells us that the quarter note gets the beat. What does that mean? It means if you're using a metronome or there has like a drummer, each beat like this goes to 1 quarter note. So every measure is always going to have the same number of beats in it unless the time signature changes. So for instance, if it says 4/4, you're in common time, which would be 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. If, on the other hand, it says 3, 4, you're going to be in a different time, which is going to have a different feel and a different rhythm to it, more like a waltz, and it would feel like this. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So the time signature is very important to pay attention to when you're doing your rhythm. So what am I talking about by beats in a measure? If you have a measure, those are separated by what's called bar lines. You're going to see lines that divide the music up into what we call measures. You don't hear bar lines, but you do see them, and they're really there just to keep you in your meter or your time signature, to help you understand how the music is divided and how you're going to count it. The next thing then you would have would be a double bar. A double bar is like a bar line, but it has one thin line, and then it has a second very thick line after it, and that's going to be only at the end of a piece of music. So you're going to keep playing. When you see your staffs, you're going to see your bar lines, you're going to see your clefs going by, but you're going to play until you see the double bar. Do not stop until you see the double bar. So if you're at the end of a page and there's no double bar, flip the page, because there's probably some more music on the next page. The next thing then that we would want to talk about would be a repeat sign. It looks like a double bar, but it has 2 dots. So when you see the double bar line, but there's 2 dots in front of it, you're actually going to want to go back to either the beginning or the next repeat sign that you see, and you're going to want to repeat that section of the music 1 time. You can also have something called a second ending. When you have a second ending, it would look like you have a little bracket, and then it would have a 1, and then after that would be another bracket with the number 2. When you have those second endings, you're going to want to play the first ending once, go back from the repeat sign to the beginning. Then when you get to where the first ending is, you skip the first ending. You don't play what's under that bracket. You skip to the second ending, and then you play from there and you move on. Okay? So the next thing then we would want to talk about would be the notes. Not talking about the pitches at this point. We're still talking about rhythms. You're going to see a lot of different notes. The most basic ones that we want to talk about, the very first one would be a quarter note. We talked about that when we were discussing the time signature. So the note, the number on the bottom gives you your which note gets the beat. So if you have a 4 on the bottom, quarter note gets the beat. What's a quarter note? A quarter note is the black note with a stem, and that gets 1 beat. So let's say you saw 4 quarter notes on your music on the piano. It would be like this: 1, 1, 1, 1. That would be 4 quarter notes. 2 quarter notes would be 1, 1. So you can see that each one sounds for 1 beat. Then you have half notes. Half notes are like 2 quarter notes put together essentially, but you're going to hold them. You're not going to play it a second time. You're going to hold it for 2 beats. So it's going to sound like this: 1, 2. And you can see you're going to hold it the full length of the pitch. The next one that you would have would be a whole note. That one does not have a stem. It's a white note. It's white in the center, and that's going to get 4 beats. So a whole note gets 4 beats, and it's going to sound like this: 1, 2, 3, 4. And you're going to want to hold it the whole way through. The other thing that you would want to look out for when you're playing would be a dot, because a dot changes the value of a note. So if there's a dot next to a note, not under a note, but next to a note, then that's going to mean that you add half of the note's value back to itself. So for instance, if you have a quarter note and you have a dot next to it, that's called a dotted quarter. So you get 1 beat plus half of it. So half of 1 is a half, so it's going to be 1.5 beats. An easier one to understand would be a dotted half note. So you know that your half note gets 2 beats. You're going to go 1, 2. If it has a dot on the side of it, you're going to take half of 2, which is 1, and add it back on. And now you know that that dotted half note equals 3 beats. And it's going to go 1, 2, 3. We also have some smaller values of notes where if you see they have a little flag or a beam when they're connected, those are eighth notes, which get half a beat each. So 2 of them are equal to 1 beat. So you would go 1 and. So 4 of them would be 1 and 2 and, which actually gives you only 2 beats. And then you can go on from there. 2 bar lines would, on the top, 2 beams will give you 16th notes. 3 bar lines on the top would give you 32nd notes. And that's usually the biggest we use. Sometimes you'll see with 4 beams, that's going to be 64th notes, but we don't see those very frequently. So those are all the notes that we have. Music is made up of sound, but it's also made up of silence. So some of the other things that you might see in music would be rests. So for instance, there's a quarter note, but there's a quarter rest as well. And if you don't have, let's say you have to have 4 beats in each measure, in our example of 4/4. You have to have something there if you only want 2 beats of sound, but you want 2 beats of silence. So you would do, say, maybe 2 quarter notes, and then you would have a rest. So a quarter note and a quarter rest. So it would be like 1 rest, 1 rest. You could do it that way. You also have a half rest, which looks like a little hat. And I like to kind of put the word together, hat, half. Sounds the same. Why do you need a device like that? Because a whole rest looks like an upside down hat. And you want to keep the 2 straight. So a half rest, just like a half note, gets 2 beats. And then a whole rest, similar to a whole note, gets 4 beats. But a whole rest can also get 3 beats because it just takes up the whole measure. So if you see a whole rest inside a measure, it means you rest for the entire measure.